Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Nick Bailey. I'm one of the co-founders of From Day One, which is a forum on corporate values. Welcome to today's webinar. We're extremely excited about this topic. We're going to look today at how employers can attract and retain women by offering more individualized and inclusive benefits. Before we get started on that, though, I want to share something special that we have for today's attendees. One of our monthly virtual conferences is coming up in March, on Wednesday, March 9th. And this is relevant to today's topic as well. It's entitled Enhancing Total Rewards to Fit the Workforce's New Expectations. It's particularly valuable for employers who want to know which benefits, which features are most important for workers, especially now in this post-pandemic era and the great realignment that we're seeing. Thanks to the partners for today's webinar, including today's sponsor, we have complimentary VIP tickets, and they're available for those who've joined today's webinar, and that is you. So I'm going to put a link right now in the chat. If you take a look in your Zoom client in that little chat section, you should see it. You're going to want to take advantage of this offer. The regular price for conference tickets for virtual events for us is $149, but with this link, that becomes free. It's a free VIP ticket that gets you into the entire event. So today, we're going to be exploring the topic, making benefits work for women in the workplace. In the midst of the Great Resignation, employers face the challenge of retaining and attracting women in the workplace. According to a McKinsey survey, 1 in 3 women are considering leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers because of the pandemic. So what can HR and business leaders do to provide better, individualized support? How can employers implement inclusive benefits that ensure sustainable value to women in the workplace? Today, we're going to learn a little bit more about how personalized benefits can help turn that mass exodus around. The sponsor for today's webinar is Flo Health, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them now. Flo Health is the world's leading female health and wellness product, with 200 million plus downloads and 43 million people using it monthly. Flo empowers women in the workplace with the resources they need to thrive physically and mentally. With over 100 plus medical experts, Flo supports women across all ages and health needs, providing cycle and ovulation tracking, personalized health insights, expert tips, and a private community for women to share their questions and concerns. Now, a few quick logistical items. The webinar today is being recorded. This is going to be available on demand after the event, and you can look out for an email that you'll get in about 24 hours that'll have that link if you want to share it with someone who couldn't make it today. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credit for this session. We're accredited by both SHRM, SHRM, and HRCI. You can look out for a written account of the conversation. That'll be on our website at fromday1.co within about a week or so. From 45 minutes into the webinar, or 45 minutes from now, we will have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time, and you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in Zoom to submit the questions now, later, whenever you think of them. We'll start to think about those and start responding to them at about 45 minutes after the hour. For our moderator for today's session, we're delighted to welcome Emily McCreary-Reese-Sparsa. She's an independent writer and editor. She writes about workplace culture, DEI, and hiring. Her work has appeared in Fast Company, In Her Sight, among many others, syndicated by MSN and The Motley Fool, and she's a frequent contributor to From Day One. We're so happy to have her here today. Thanks again, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. This is an area I've done a lot of studying in and reporting on women's experiences in the workplace and how we can make that better. As many of you know, the first year of the pandemic, 2020, saw women leaving the workforce by the millions. In 2021, just under 1 million women, about twice the number of men, re-entered the workforce. However, it's not necessarily because it became any easier to return to paid work. And as Nick already mentioned, 1 in 3 women have already considered leaving the workforce, or at least downshifting their careers as a result of the effects of COVID. So we desperately need to renew our interest in the role employers can play in supporting women's well-being. And our discussion, of course, will focus on how employers can better design their benefits to do this. So to begin our session, I'm going to have all of our panelists introduce themselves briefly and tell us the role that they play in creating better benefits for women in their organizations. We'll begin with Lora.
Good afternoon, good morning. I'm Lora Christopher. I'm the Executive Director of Employee Benefits at Consumers Energy. It's a large utility in the state of Michigan. My role really is the strategic role of attraction, retention of our existing coworkers, new coworkers, especially female coworkers in the space of utility, but responsible for healthcare, retirement benefits, absence management, the dreaded COVID response team, and our well-being team as well.
Thanks, Laura. Jess?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Jess Huang. I am a partner at McKinsey. And I love that you cited our Women in the Workplace research. I'm actually one of the partner leads and authors on our Women in the Workplace research. It's something I'm super passionate about. And so we've been doing this research now for 7 years, and it gives us a look into how companies have addressed diversity and inclusion issues, including benefits. And we've also taken a look at what the experiences women are in these workplaces as a result.
Thanks, John.
Good afternoon. My name is John Eshelman. I'm Director of Benefits for Memorial Hermann Health System. It's a 29,000 employee health system here in Houston, Texas. Of our 29,000, about 78% of our workforce is women. So we are considering women in everything that we do when we look at benefit programs to implement and maintain. And in my role, I oversee all of our benefit programs from health and welfare to retirement to career development.
Thanks, John. Jennifer?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. Excited to talk with you all today. I am the Senior Vice President at Marsh McLennan Agency. We are a broker consulting agency working nationally on employee benefits. I'm located down here in South Florida, but we do work nationally for our clients. And my role is to really be that strategic partner for my clients and prospective clients, focusing around employee benefits. Work-life balance, women in the workplace, enhancing benefits. These are all areas that I spend a lot of time on with my clients around strategy. So happy to talk about this topic today.
Great, we're happy to have you. And last but not least, Chad at Flo.
Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm Chad Deschler, and I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Flo Health. And as Nick kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, Flo is an AI-driven platform helping all women across the reproductive cycle from the start of that in the teenage years all the way through menopause. And very excited to help organizations and companies throughout the globe as they kind of bring these type of solutions to women in the workforce. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thanks, Chad. All right, let's get started. So much has changed in the last 2 years, of course, when it comes to what it's like to be a working person, specifically a woman who does paid work. Do you think that employers are getting better at responding to women's needs? We'll start again with Laura on this one. What do you think?
I think wise employers are getting better at responding to women's needs. Definitely, it's critical right now for employers to be the employer of choice for females. And as we go into this, as we continue to work through the pandemic, employers really have to be more creative to focus on the needs of women to attract and retain those individuals as well.
Do you think that as the pandemic carries on and many of us just sort of become used to, I hate the phrase new normal because it's so it's so tired, but it is kind of true. As we just adapt to these new ways of working, do you think we run the risk of kind of neglecting these things that really we need to support women?
I think it depends on the industry that you're in. In the utility space, we really focus on safety and well-being. And so we really are hypersensitive around this topic, trying to continue what this new norm is. The new norm keeps changing every day, right? And the needs for females specifically in the benefit realm, whether it's family care, daycare options, additional time off, parental support groups, all those things need to kind of pivot and shift. There is no new norm. It's really this creative space that we really need to listen to our coworkers and what they're experiencing, and then say, what can we do and how can we support that? It's moving at a much faster pace on how we support our coworkers and show up for them during this pandemic piece. And I don't think it's dragging out. I don't think it's exhausted in our industry specifically. We're a utility. We have to be there 100% for our customers and be safe. And so we're struggling with what is the new norm and what can we do to support people in real time.
Jennifer, what's your take? Do you feel like employers are getting better at responding? Do we risk fatigue? Do you agree with Lora? You want to challenge her?
So, I get a broad spectrum. I work with clients in various industries. Some are, healthcare tends to have a high population of females. Some of my manufacturing clients tend to have a low population of females. I think I'm seeing some progression. I'll say that I'm seeing some progression across the board. I think some industries and some employers are getting up to speed a little bit faster than others. Where I'm starting to see some correlation is where the thought leaders are within the organizations. If we've got some, females that are sitting around the C-suite table and they have a say, they can relate to the employee base. I'm starting to see that progressive forward movement a little bit better than that old school, male-dominated C-suite population. There's a lot more benchmark data that's being made available, a lot more educational platforms like this one, just getting the word out, bringing that awareness, because it's just one employer at a time that is going to help that momentum move forward. So I don't think it's going as fast as I'd like to see it. I'm a mom myself, but I think I'm seeing some forward movement. And in some of the more of the virtual space, I'm seeing a little bit more of that become available with employees.
Jess, do you have a different point of view from a research perspective, since you're looking at this from a very different point of view?
Yeah, I think in some ways better is hard to define, right? What we saw in the last couple of years is that companies really tried to move faster and be a little bit more reactive to changing circumstances. And I think they should get credit for that, right? I agree with Jennifer that like the overall arc has been slow and slower than I would like, but I do want to give credit to the companies that stood up over the last couple of years and said, hey, we need to make some changes in childcare benefits, or we need to make some changes in the way we work day to day, so that women and moms have a little bit more flexibility. And quite frankly, I think not just a women's issue, but issue overall of, increasing mental health supports during a really stressful time. That was the pandemic. And so I'm a little optimistic maybe, but I would say that overall, I do think that we've seen improvement, and, there's reason that we should, have hope for where the trend is going.
John, I'd like to know from you some of the new benefits that your organization has introduced. You have such a large share of your workforce are women. What new introductions have you made with them in mind? And how are they going?
Yeah, so, I'm going to step back about 2 years ago when this pandemic all started, caught everyone by surprise, and lots of people started vacating the offices and working from home. And to some extent, we had a workforce in our organization that did too, but most of our workforce and most of our clinical staff is women. They couldn't go home. They had to be there to tend to patients as everyone was learning about the new COVID pandemic that was starting. And so we had to scramble really quickly to make sure that our workforce could get into work and provide care for the city of Houston and everyone who was coming to our hospitals. So we instituted some emergency child care. As child care centers and schools were closing, this was critical for us to get our workforce in. So we quickly stood up a cash payment system to where our employees could get reimbursed for the child care that they needed. And as the pandemic has continued on and evolved into a different, I'll say a non-emergency situation, because we're all starting to adapt to it. We've transitioned away from that emergency cash, but we've also enhanced our emergency backup child care so that as employees have their regular child care that can't make it because they get sick with COVID or any other reason, they can use emergency backup care. And we've increased the number of days that we've offered to our employee base. Another area that we really focused on, Emily, is well-being and family support. When I started in benefits many, many years ago, it was mostly around health insurance and dental and vision, but the pandemic kind of transitioned that into more of a well-being and mental health support. So we've taken this last year to look at our options, and as of yesterday, we just introduced to our workforce a new family support benefit that they get for free. It's called Wealthy. It provides caregiving support. So if any of our employees need help getting hospital visits or hospital appointments taken care of, or their parent needs Medicare insurance, they can work with Wealthy, and Wealthy does the heavy lifting of that. And we see this a lot with our women in our workplace. They're in that sandwich generation. They've got kids themselves to take care of, but they're also taking care of aging parents. So we are looking at new ways that we can provide that family support to them and still have them, want to be in the workforce for us, because nursing shortages are critical. And if we don't keep our nurses, we're going to have a lot of trouble being able to take care of patients.
Regarding your introduction of emergency childcare, I think it's worth mentioning that at this point, parents who have very young children are still very much in that need to cover childcare crisis mode. There's no approved vaccine for children under the age of 5, though that could change very, very soon. I know Pfizer and BioNTech are expected to request emergency approval from the FDA as soon as this week. So hopefully that will go through. But yes, while some children are back in school or back in daycare centers, many are still not, or those centers are closing with unpredictably closing. Chad, what kinds of benefits newer types of benefits are you seeing your clients interested in on the health side?
Yeah, we're seeing a number of different things. I think there were a couple points that were made around, recognizing where companies are starting to make some strides. And if, historically it was you're either all in or you're not doing anything. And I think the fact that people are making little baby steps and implementing new programs, some of which, for example, I know Flo as an employer, we've implemented a 6-month maternity full paid leave for maternity service. We have a 1-month fully paid paternity support as well. And then also if there's a child loss during pregnancy, we actually implemented a new program and support for employees on that front. So as an employer, that's one thing we've done. I've seen a myriad of other solutions that are being done across the globe. And we work with companies similar to Jess and Jennifer all throughout the world. And it is interesting to see the different steps that they are taking. So I would applaud what a lot of people are doing on this front. And if we can do just one little thing, like a paternity extended program or maternity extended program, what have you, I think those things make big differences for companies. And quite frankly, with this state of resignation that so many people are in throughout the globe, it is a way to attract top talent. It is a way to retain that top talent as well. And the days, as we've talked about, of offering a free lunch during work or nice treats at work, I don't want to say are completely over, but I think have changed. And so I think employers and employees are looking for something unique and different. And that's where you're starting to see some strides employers are making.
What you brought up, Chad, about parental leave versus, I think you said maternity and paternity leave.
Correct.
That's something that's really important because giving male parents the opportunity and encouraging them to take paid parental leave if paid is available, or just parental leave in general, is really important because it can normalize the practice of parental leave. And from my own reporting, I happen to know that even with the introduction of paternity leave options or just general parental leave options, women still are often penalized for taking them in a sort of soft sense in the way they're regarded in the workplace. Jess, I'd like to hear from you some ways that employers can think about creating company culture that makes it more than okay for people to use their benefits, specifically as it relates to women, because unfortunately, we're still not quite out of this. We're not quite free of the notion that there are women's benefits. I realize that's what we're talking about right now.
No, you're totally right. In our research, we actually found that 1 in 5 women worry that it will hurt their career if they request or take advantage of like flexible work benefits. And that's so sad, right? Because companies are working so hard to put these in place. And it goes to tell you that just having the program and policy is not enough if you don't create an environment where people feel they can take it. And I think number one, what you mentioned, Emily, about men taking the advantage is really critical. Because if you see your male coworker also taking advantage of those benefits, it feels more okay. It feels like you're more on a level playing field. I also think it's really important to see leaders within the organization take advantage of these benefits. Because if the leaders are taking advantages, it gives a bit of like a implicit permission that this is normal. This is something that everyone does, and you can be really successful as a executive, for example, at the company and take the benefit. And then I also think there's, a little bit of, with culture, it's always hard, right? There's a little bit of the harder programs and policies that you might put in place to ensure that there is an explicit bias. So making sure that when you think about reviews, when you think about promotions, and when you think about things like who are you going to put up for the promotion, who's going to be able to take that surprise, high visibility project. People who are making those decisions have had the right, training so that they're on the lookout for biases that may actually be the reason why women are nervous about taking these benefits. I think these trainings and just being willing to be on the lookout and calling it out is really important. I also know some companies have sort of like ramp on programs, right, that are explicit and helpful for women because they know they're not just going to come back to like zero support network. But at the end of the day, I think it's not just about the women's benefits. It's not just about encouraging women to take advantage of it. It's really about everyone else that comprises the organization and normalizing taking the benefits, not, whether you're a woman or not.
I know Coinbase was recently in the news for announcing that they would have required time off. So not just, they realized, of course, that it wasn't enough for them to offer unlimited PTO. They're now more or less shutting down the company for about a week every quarter so that 99% of their staff is off at a given time. So everyone's not only given permission, but required to take a step back. Lora, your workforce is predominantly male. Is that correct?
Correct.
So what kind of position does that put women in your workforce in terms of their feeling comfortable taking advantage of benefits designed specifically for them?
I think Jess, actually, I'm going to piggyback some of the comments she shared about really we did launch a parental leave where females receive 100% for 6 months and males receive 4 months at 100% pay. That has been huge. That's much more of a higher level of male leave too. And I think that brings awareness around the more males that are off during those critical phases of that early child birth. I think they can appreciate a little bit more what females do, sometimes typically in that 12-week FMLA time. And what we've seen is more males are starting to use the benefit, but it is taking some of that senior leadership to take the benefit to showcase how it works as a male, as well as a female. And what we're learning is there is a lot of support on both sides of the gender in this space. And as the males start to experience this, they're starting to recognize the importance of the female being off that full 6 months, which I think is really important, and really developing plans in place so that that individual that is off for the 6 months feels supported, feels like their workload is managed, feels like they still have the opportunities for promotional experience. And then we also added a flexibility level in there. Not everybody wants to be off for a full 6 months. And so we actually extended it for a full year. So individuals can take that intermittently for that entire year, which actually has helped a ton on that coming back, transitioning back into the workplace. What does that look like? How does that support with a shortage of childcare support as well? We're realizing that helps kind of, bridge that gap there. But very interesting. And then we do have an interesting dynamic within our workforce. We have quite a few married couples. So that's interesting, just a random carrot that we have. And so seeing the male go through it and seeing the female go through it and sharing that story as a couple through our employee resource groups, through our internal websites has been very helpful as people start to think about how they support one another, not only with their coworkers and leaders, but also in their family setting.
The idea that someone can take that leave anytime, as they wish, dole it out as they wish over a year, that seems to reflect this larger trend of not only flexibility in terms of when and where you do your work, but how you're able to design your entire work experience. And that applies to how you even use your benefits, which benefits you use, and when you take PTO, when you take rental leave, all those sorts of things. So I think largely that's something that's been so welcomed by workforce and also by employers too, who are clearly getting, healthier employees by giving them the opportunity to do that. I want to talk a little bit about the idea of short-term versus long-term needs, and how you guys think about what are the short-term needs of your female employees, and what are the long-term? So what's the difference? And then maybe a couple examples of how you're satisfying them. We'll start with John here. How are you thinking about short-term, long-term, and what are you doing to satisfy each?
Yeah, Emily. So first of all, what one person's long-term is someone else's short-term and vice versa. So it may be different for everyone. The way that I see it, for the short-term needs, it's often around childcare, it's fertility benefits, adoption benefits, time off practices, as we've been talking about, and also around flexible policies, making sure that people have that support to take time off and or just be able to be present in the workforce, but have that flexibility to take some time off or deal with family situations as well. As far as a long term, I think career development is very, very important, especially around women, mentoring, giving them mentoring opportunities so that they have that exposure to the C-suite. As more and more women come into the C-suite, it becomes more and more important in my mind to have those mentoring and networking opportunities as well. I think financial education is also another long-term goal, just making sure that all the resources are there. And then also, just family, caregiving support, is going to be more and more crucial going forward as well. And then I said this in the short-term goal, but I also think in a long-term goal, it's the time off as well. So I think it's important for all purposes that time off is provided and encouraged to be used amongst your workforce to be able to welcome, them to stay in the workforce. Otherwise, they're going to become part of this Great Resignation and stay part of it.
Jennifer, are you thinking about things any differently? Are you overlapping with that, with John's philosophy?
Yeah, I have a lot of similar opinions that John shared. I'd say, really getting in tune with your workforce is really, I think, is step one. Because just as John said, short-term, long-term is going to mean something different to each of us. And we're in different phases of our lives. Sometimes the workforce is so large, you really are going to find that a third of your population is here, a third of your population is new parents, a third of your population is kids are going off to college. So I think understanding the dynamics, the demographics of your population is really an important starting point, because just as much as starting out as new parents, where some of the short term is the education around preparing for perhaps your first child, the prenatal education, making sure that there are healthy baby programs available, making sure there's access to those programs, understanding the FMLA and short-term disability process to reduce stress. That might not apply to everyone. You might have a workforce that really needs some support or EAP support around kids going off to college. That is a very difficult, from a psychological standpoint, a mental health standpoint, on a household, where that is sometimes overlooked. And that is an important benefit that people need to look at for their long-term needs, and flexibility around being able to be present for your child in that process. So I agree with a lot of what John said, and I think the first thing to really get ingrained with is having a finger on the pulse of your demographics. And sometimes as simple as surveying is really important. Being careful with the surveys, obviously, because you don't want to make an impression that whatever the answers are, that, it's like a wish list, a free-for-all. But figuring out a way to really get in tune there, to have that connection, I think is important.
We've been talking about women generally, of course, just saying women, but that's not really giving enough credit to just all of the different identity groups that women occupy. So all women exist at some intersection, be it gender and race, gender and ability, gender and orientation. So Chad, how do you think employers can best think about supporting women at all of their different intersections and not thinking of women as a homogenous group?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, first of all, intersectionality really does, and this has been touched on already, start at the leadership level. It's one thing, and it's quite honestly not enough for employers just to look at things generically, like you just described, but to understand how the overlapping abilities come together. And that does include the race, ethnicity, physical abilities, sexual orientation, and whatnot. I always, whenever speaking with clients or other leaders of organizations, I want them to, it's important, I think, collectively to think about unconscious bias that's out there and that makes talent intersections invisible within organizations. I mean, it's a reality. Things like that do happen, and it's important for all of us to kind of assess the inequity that might be there. When you think about hiring, compensation, you think about development, all of those areas there. These are things that I think leaders should really be thoughtful of versus just a broad brush of how should we approach this. We're really thinking about all those other aspects you talked about. Setting up targets, I would say measurable targets for organizations, thinking about those types of programs you want to implement, making sure they're focusing on diversity and inclusion. Again, not just setting something up, but being very cognizant of your population, like Jennifer mentioned, knowing and having a pulse of what your organization consists of. And also, I think it just, as it pertains to leadership, we need leaders that are willing to stand for equality and really be a force in the marketplace around that. You should recognize, and reward opportunities and efforts when companies do make diverse moves and show that equity. Again, I think it is baby steps. And if organizations can start to do those little things, I think, again, that becomes a beacon out there that people are attracted to. And so I do think it starts at the leadership level, and I do think it involves everybody. So I think that's an important thing that we need to think of when thinking of all these different intersectional type components.
I want to get Jess's take on this as well. But before I kick it over to you, Jess, I want to remind everybody that we'll begin our Q&A at 2:45. So if anyone in the audience has a question, please put it in the Q&A, and we'll be fielding those questions here in about 10 minutes. Jess, what's your take on intersectionality and how we can support women in all the ways that they exist?
Yeah, to Chad's point, this is so critical because we know that women in these intersectional identities are having a much worse experience in the workplace, and they often have very unique circumstances in their personal lives at home that impact, their day-to-day at work. So one, what Chad mentioned in terms of awareness, I think is so critical, right? Just the acknowledgement that women with these intersectional identities are experiencing work differently, and they're also likely experiencing their personal lives differently, which impacts their work. I also think, you mentioned, Chad, setting some targets. I think just to put a really fine point at it, it's setting these targets, or even if you don't set targets, tracking at an intersectional level. So what we found in our research is that a lot of companies actually look at women's representation or representation of their employees of color, but fewer companies actually track for Black women, LGBTQ women, Asian women, and at every single intersection, how does their representation look at each and every level? What do the promotion rates look like, and how does that differ from white women? How does that differ from white men? And also their experiences. And so, what Jennifer was mentioning, like sometimes it's good to pulse your employees. It's good to pulse your employees on how they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and then making sure you cut that data at the intersectional level so you have a really good idea of what those different challenges are. And I think, by doing that, you sort of get to the first step of identifying what benefits or what, things these employees need. And then you can move to step 2, which is then actually addressing it.
That reminds me of a point that I believe it was Lora made earlier about ensuring that there are women at high levels of representation in your company, that it's not just white women at high levels of representation, that you need women who belong to other identity groups too. And that's what diversity really starts to look like. And that's when you can actually do a much better job. Not that anyone can't, but I think you're just more likely to do a better job of representing and advocating for women who don't belong to cis white female identity and that slice of the demographics. So before we move on to our Q&A, I want to get a sense from any of the panelists what some common misconceptions about what women need from employer benefits. Jess is already laughing, so we'll just go to her first.
Well, I think I'll just say a broader thing, which I think the biggest misconception is that you need to focus on benefits specific to women. And we've kind of, talked about this broadly. But often when you put benefits in for parental leave, for flexibility, for childcare, these are not women-specific benefits. all employees benefit. And so this misconception that it's like, oh, these are benefits that women need is kind of silly. It's benefits that we as humans need. And so I think that's number one. And when we looked, we look at our data and like who experiences significant life events and who actually needs to take advantage of flexibility and other similar benefits. And what we found is that there's very little difference between women and men in terms of experiencing these life events where it would be helpful to take advantage of these benefits. And often it's not just about parenthood, right? So, over 2 times as many employees overall take leave for other personal or family health issues. And so I think the biggest thing is to acknowledge that these are benefits for all employees, and that all employees should take them, because if my husband takes advantage of a benefit that his company has, and that allows me to not be stressed out fully and like, oh my gosh, it's just on me to take advantage of that benefit, that's great, right? And we really need that, I think, to be able to make progress as a whole.
I think Jess makes a great point, and I'll go back to the monolith comment from earlier. Just because we put in child care benefits into our program a couple of years ago, that wasn't necessarily what all women wanted. We got, for as much praise as we got for adding it, we got quite a few comments saying, "Why are you adding this? I don't need this. This does me no good." So it's really just making sure, going back to Jennifer's comment, having that pulse on your workforce and making sure that the benefits you design are not for a monolithic group and that you have broad representation in there.
Lastly, before we get into our Q&A, we may be able to come back to some other questions too after we wrap that. I'd like to know from Jennifer, maybe how employers can think about balancing costs. Benefits are not free, of course, and introducing new ones is a matter of budget. So any advice for employers who might be looking at these new benefits going, I don't know how, would love to, but don't know how?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And it's important because the mindset traditionally has always been this medical plan or, a disability plan. Those are really the traditional benefits that would just be put in place. And there's a tangible cost there that's sometimes a little bit easier to budget. There's a premium associated with it. But overall, you really have got to look at it from a value standpoint. And, what's the ROI? And putting a benefit out there, are you offsetting costs that are probably maybe not being used on another benefit? And you can now receive some better value from a different source of a benefit. This is probably something that's near and dear to what Chad does, but some of these benefit programs in the medical plan are embedded. They have some fertility benefit to it. They're not really helpful, but you can say you've got fertility. The carrier can say there's fertility benefit in there. They can't really put a cost associated with it, but if it's not an effective benefit, is it doing more damage than good? Is it not providing proper benefit towards healthy babies, or reducing the amount of fertility treatments that one would necessarily need to have? Is there a better way to skin the cat? I use that term a lot. And I think that's the best way to really kind of get at cost, is to understand what's the overall value of what you have in place. There's soft dollars associated with it and there's hard dollars associated with it. But what's the overall value of what the benefits you have in place? And then let's put together a wish list of what we want to have, figure out where there's some waste and overlap, and start prioritizing that way before we start sitting down and really just saying, oh, well, if we add, unlimited PTO, it's going to cost this. If we add, if we expand family leave, it's going to cost this. That's how I would start the process versus just itemizing costs on a line item, is starting the process with value and in return on investment, because that is going to now direct you towards how to prioritize benefits, in my opinion, because you might not be attracting the talent you want. There's a cost associated with that hamster wheel of recruiting. You might be having high turnover because of, you know, benefits that company A up the street is offering. There's cost associated with that that's not being captured into the big picture.
Thanks, Jennifer. All right, let's move into our Q&A. Any audience members who want to pose a question to the group, please get them in the Q&A function and we will get to them. I'm going to start with a question from an anonymous attendee that asks, have any of your companies implemented required time off and or other strategies that have been effective at getting people to actually use their benefits or PTO? Anybody can jump in on this one if you have any ideas or.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say I had a number of clients. Surprisingly, it was a little bit of an eye opener, but they noticed that in the EAP reporting or reporting around mental health utilization, there was not enough preventive utilization that was taking place. So what the company did is they actually put in place a forced utilization for their time off, but also shut down a period of time and, you know, put people in groups. So if you were in group A, you're shut down for this particular week. It was really forcing people to disconnect. I thought that was pretty interesting. I found that to be inspiring because companies are saying, okay, if you're not going to take advantage of these, you know, time off so you can have some disconnect time, we're going to help you get into the mindset, get comfortable with it, and understand that our culture is comfortable with it. And hopefully down the road, it's not more of a force that's kind of, you know, starting to become part of the culture and they get comfortable with it. So I've seen a little bit of it and I thought that was interesting, the way they approached that.
I would add one thing to that. I think one thing that the US has kind of lagged behind historically is you think about maternity time off, 6 weeks, or just very limited time. And even for paternity time off, very, very short window of time. And I think what's good is we're now starting to get kind of awareness of global multinational organizations that have extended periods of time off. And not only that, companies are kind of matching what other countries are doing, like in Europe and other parts of the world, but they're also kind of requiring when you do take that time off, it is truly time off. There's no laptop going home with you. There's no, you know, you are disconnected. And I think that is I think that's a positive trend that I'm starting to see in organizations because it does allow a family or a partner or whomever to focus on that moment in time, wherever that is at. So I am starting to see some of that and starting to see some of the more generous benefits in US-based companies, which I think is a positive thing.
I want to address another question from our audience. It says, we have a mom whose young child is in the hospital for several weeks with an infection. She's used the paid family leave we offer. She's used her time off. What more can we do?
I mentioned, I think I put a comment in there if I did it correctly. Our organization has a vacation donation program, and it actually works out really well. So individuals can donate vacation, and then it sits in a pool. And in that pool, individuals can submit an application to determine if they want to have additional paid time off. And it works out really well. We have it separated between union and non-union, but it is very beneficial. It allows individuals to care for their coworkers who are going through something that's really tough. And it's also very visible. So there's no, should I be taking this benefit? Should I not? It's really open and transparent. And it has come in handy really as we look at extensions of leaves associated with COVID, exposures, quarantines in that space. It's been very helpful for our population. And it's easy to administer. I think that's one of the low hanging fruit. It's easy to administer and it's a win-win.
Anybody else on this question? Okay, we'll move on. I like this one as well from a viewer. Has anyone implemented a readiness assessment or checklist before returning to work, especially around mental health? I think this is really interesting.
We have not. But
I don't.
It's a great idea. So I'm going to take that back. So thank you, whoever mentioned it.
Yeah.
I mean, we do make sure that our employees have, are ready to come back in the sense that there's no mental health issues. We work with our EAP to do fitness assessments for those who have had severe mental crises that have kept them out of the workforce. But I like your idea about the mental readiness.
Yeah, we don't have a checklist for that. We have a wellness division within our organization, and I have not seen a checklist, but I love that idea, that readiness assessment or checklist. I love that idea. I'm actually going to take that back and propose something get developed. But what we do have is in our wellness department, we have trained clinicians that will provide our clients with a training. It's an 8-hour training course. And what that training course is designed to do is you can bring in managers into this course. We highly recommend HR team members in this course, but definitely managers, HR, and any other supervisors. And they're trained to pick up on cues, pick up on messaging or behavioral differences. They're trained to kind of pick up on red flags with mental health or concerns associated with mental health, not to serve as a clinician, but to serve as someone a little, to be a little bit more aware. And when interacting with the employees coming back from leave, wanting to go out on leave, requesting for time off, and it's intended for them to get a little bit more in tune of what to pick up on. And then step 2 is teaching them how to navigate to get help that the employee might need based on the cues. So we do have that. We have put that in place. A number of our clients, especially during the pandemic, have gone through this training, and there's a true certification that the HR team members and the managers would earn at the end of the training course. We have found that to be helpful in getting the organization more prepared and educated around mental health needs of their population. But I love the assessment idea, and I'm going to take that back.
Yeah, thanks to whoever put that one in there. I think you just gave everybody a good idea. Chad, this next one, I think I want you to answer first. Someone asks, when we talk about intersectionality and diversity, how are your companies handling verbiage around being intentional with wording to make trans and non-cis employees feel comfortable and included? For example, around fertility, where fertility benefits may be utilized by trans men and not just people who would identify under the label woman.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. It's what I have seen with some of our clients around this is, we talked about earlier about getting engagement from the leadership up top, but I actually think it's important to touch in and tap into the communities you're referencing when developing communication, when developing programming, or rolling out new things within an organization. We've seen within companies developing champions. That when you think about creating communication, when you think about rolling out something, creating champions within various communities that we've talked about, that involving them from the outset. So not just developing messaging, not just developing a program and rolling it out, hoping it will work and resonate, but instead helping those that will be impacted by it, help draft it, author it, and come to the table with that type of guidance that HR, I'm sure, and we spoke to several leaders within HR that would love that support and help kind of draft and craft that together. So that's what I have seen some companies do. I do think that historically, and there are a couple clients in particular, employers that we've spoken to, that taboo type topics that generally are not discussed in a workplace setting, some of which we've talked about today, need to be talked about, need to be discussed and communicated. So I would encourage leaders to bring those that will be receiving this message to help kind of author that from the outset. That'd be my thought.
Any suggestions from the group on getting the discussion started with leadership about making these types of changes? I'm assuming new benefits for your organization that will really make them listen. So bringing new changes and benefits to leadership. How do you get them on board? Maybe some of you have done this very recently.
Yeah, Emily, we have done this. I'll say luckily for us, it's been easy to have those discussions because of the mental health crisis that we're seeing in our workforce, and that's very visible to leaders as well. I would suggest, just making sure that, you have research, whether it's Jess's study or any other study out there that supports, the value of these benefits, and looking to see what areas of benefits you could cut costs from so that you can implement some of these.
Anybody else?
I think cost is always what, leadership is thinking about. What's the impact to the bottom line and what's the ROI to it? So if there's any supporting facts, such as a benchmarking study that can support the why and the what, if there is any financials that can support the why and the what, a lot of times some analysis can be prepared that will show what the cost impact is going to be. That always tends to be what helps get it over the finish line with the CFO and the decision makers holding the red pen to the check.
We've had success to partnering with our employee resource groups. So certain employee resource groups will develop business cases on certain enhanced benefits, and leaning into that relationship between an employee resource group and then the subject matter experts, such as benefits or compensation along those lines, has been really helpful to go in to present more than just like, this is an SME explaining how great this benefit is, but really giving that cultural perspective of, these are our coworkers that really are interested in this benefit, and this is why. It really ties that overall approach of what the leaders need to hear and what is experiencing out in the field or out with our coworkers. And we've been pretty successful in implementing some larger benefits that way. It takes a little bit of time, but it's definitely also builds that relationship really well with the leadership team and the employee resource groups as well.
Great. We are just about at time, but I want to thank our panelists so much for participating. Chad, Jess, Laura, Jennifer, and John. I really appreciate you guys taking the time and sharing your wonderful knowledge and experience with us. I'm going to kick it back to Nick from day one.
Thanks so much, Emily. And thank you to all of our speakers for such a thoughtful and actionable conversation today with a lot of practical advice as well. Thanks again to our sponsor, Flo Health. And thanks to you who are listening and participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website. That's fromday1.co, fromdayone.co, and check out some of our upcoming webinars. We have a few coming up. One this week on Thursday, February 3rd, on how employers can support workers in caregiving roles. On February 15th, we have Making Healthcare More Inclusive for All Your Employees. And on February 16th, we have a monthly virtual conference called Beyond Diversity, bringing substance to inclusion and belonging. In addition to all of these, check our website. If you are in one of the cities we are going to, yes, we are actually back in the real world doing real conferences with real people in the room, which is crazy. We just did one in Seattle about a week and a half ago that was very successful. We'll be in Houston, Atlanta, Boston, Washington, D.C., Silicon Valley in Mountain View, and a bunch of other cities in the spring, including our hometown of Brooklyn, New York, where we're going to be at the Brooklyn Museum, which is an amazing place. So if you want to come to any of those, check out our website as well. And until then, thanks so much for joining today, and we'll see you next time.